Alrighty, everybody. It is currently Sunday, November 30th, 2025, and I'm coming at you live from the island of Patmos in the year 6000 BC. This is going to be a fun episode. This episode, like I said in the current events, this one's done a little bit differently. It's a little bit more of a narrative thing as opposed to just like fact, fact, fact. I tried to tell a little bit more of a story here with this episode, but that and also this episode contains one of my favorite things in the world, which is Black American Muslims. And that might be my number one subgenre of Black Americans. Obviously, like the MAGA black dudes, fucking hilarious, love those guys, but something about Black American Muslims, especially the ones like Louis Farrakhan, like those types of guys who are in the Nation of Islam. I really like those guys. Just everything they do makes no sense. Their beliefs are pretty nonsensical, but not in a super outlandish way like the Black Israelites. Like they at least have a line of logic that they follow. It's wrong. It's incorrect. I don't know if they know how logic works, but they have some sort of logic to their madness. And just hearing them talk about it, watching the Malcolm X movie, which he was involved in the Nation of Islam for a while. It's hilarious. I love it so much. It's so funny. And probably my favorite thing of all of it is like the founding principle of it, which the founding principle of the Nation of Islam is that Christianity is the, colonizers' religion, the people who enslaved the black Africans and all that stuff. They were the ones who made them Christian. So they're not going to go with Christianity. They're going to go with Islam, the religion that famously didn't enslave black Africans at all ever. They definitely weren't the ones who did it 1,000 times worse than the white man did it. I love them, dude. It's so fucking funny. Um, and it's interesting, because in the intro for this episode, I'm gonna ramble about it for a little bit, and then we'll get to the story. Um, but in the intro to this episode, I said I was coming at you live from the island of Patmos. I think that's what it is, in the year 6000 BC, and that's if you've ever heard of Yaqub, that is Nation of Islam mythology. It's part of their creation story, and I'll shortly explain the creation story to you real quick. So basically, there was a subterranean civilization about 6,000 years ago, whenever Allah created the earth. I guess there was this subterranean civilization that was mostly black people. There was like some weird Jewish symbolism in there, but we're not going to talk about that. But anyway, this one dude named Yaqub who lived in that subterranean who lived in that subterranean civilization got really, really mad one day. There's tons of YouTube videos explaining all this. He was like supposed to marry an alien princess, and then he didn't end up marrying her. And so he got really, really angry one day. And so he came up out of the subterranean civilization, and he went to the island of Patmos. I think it's Patmos, which is an island in Greece, and he created white people, aka the albinoids, which are just like these super, like, I don't know if they're smart but vicious monsters to destroy the peaceful ebenoids, aka the black people. And I don't know if the Nation of Islam still does that. I think under Louis Farrakhan, they were pretty into that sort of stuff. But I think when Elijah Muhammad, who was like the big guy that really got the Nation of Islam going, he didn't follow that stuff as much. But yeah, they were big into that for a while. They were big into the Agartha and Yaqub and all that stuff. Um, does it say here? No. Anyway, they were big into it for a while. They've swung back and forth a little bit on, Yaqub and the albinoids and the ebenoids and all that stuff. Um, but still, it's a fun story. I really like it. I think it's a pretty funny one, dude. Apparently, this guy got really mad and just created white people to destroy black people. That's a fun story. It's a very, very fun story to me. This story that we're going to be talking about, obviously, it involves the Nation of Islam and a guy who freaked out and took a bunch of hostages. There's some funny things about it, but it's pretty tragic. Like I said, this is like the full story of the Hanafi movement. The guy who founded it is, and his Muslim name is Hammas Abdul Khaalis. It's kind of his. It focuses specifically on him, a little bit on the movement itself, and then the hostages. And yeah, it's a lot more tragic. It's a lot more tragic than that. So I thought we'd start with something nice and lighthearted. You know what I mean? We'd start with the creation of the albinoids, who were created by the black scientist Yakub, who had a giant head, in order to destroy the peaceful black ebenoids. I thought we'd start with that. Um, and so I guess we'll just get into it. This is I got about 5 pages of notes, but this shouldn't be a very long episode, and it's very interesting. And so we'll just get into it. So on March 9th, 1977, members of the Hanafi movement, led by Hammas Abdul Khaalis, took 3 buildings and their occupants hostage in Washington, D.C. They went straight for the heart, straight for the nation's capital on that one, and took some hostages. Good, good move. I never really understood the terrorism thing, if I'm being fully honest with you. Like, I think terrorism only works if you're like super powerful to begin with, right? Like if the US military does terrorism, we just call it shock and awe. And it works, right? Because when you see a fucking B-2 bomber fly over you and drop a 90,000 pound bomb on your head, then that scares the fuck out of you. But when some dude wearing sandals uses a box cutter to hijack a plane and kills a couple thousand people, yeah, that sucks, and it's definitely scary for sure, but it's not like it's not the same as these dudes using a $2.2 billion plane to drop giant fucking bombs on your head. And so that's why I think Khalees did the right move here with taking hostages. Especially, he went for Washington, D.C. He lived in Washington, D.C., but the other reason he did it, nation's capital, a lot of powerful people, just milling about around there. Um, and so I think that's specifically why he chose Washington, D.C., just because of how many powerful people were there. And I think, if you're going to choose what to do, if you're like, I'm either going to blow up a concert or take hostages, I would say hostages is better. Because if you take hostages, you kind of. Sorry, my computer just randomly turned off there, but we were talking about hostages versus terrorism. And I think one of the big things that makes taking hostages so superior to doing just an act of terror is the fact that if you do an act of terror, right? If you suicide bomb something, or drive a plane into a building, or I guess fly a plane into a building, but you could drive a plane into a building. It would just be very slow. But fly a plane into a building. In order to get your message out, you're gonna have to have someone else do it for you. So you have to have that level of trust to believe in the person to get your message out. And then also, it's extra steps to get your message out. Whereas if you're taking hostages, you can kind of get your message out right away, right? And then furthermore, you can use the hostages that you took, kind of do like a Stockholm syndrome type of thing, like be nice to them, feed them, all that stuff. Maybe give them a little bit of money if there's money involved in the situation. You know, take care of them, tell them about your ideology. And so then when the hostages get out, right, and they get like interviewed by the news and stuff, the the news is going to talk to the hostages, and the hostages are going to be like, dude, that guy was fucking nice as shit. Like, I don't, I think he seemed like such a nice, rational guy to me that like I don't know how he could be the bad guy in this situation, right? Like that might be what the hostages are going to say if you're chill to them. If you're not chill to them, then you're just going to get your message out. And even then, it's still better than terrorism, I think, in my personal opinion. Um, but yeah, so if you're going to choose between hostages and terrorism, I'd say choose hostages. I'd say our boy Abdul Khali or Hammas Abdul Khaalis did the correct thing in this situation by choosing hostages as opposed to terrorism. And this is also 1977, so terrorism wasn't that big yet. You know what I mean? The IRA would get it started, and then obviously the Muslim extremist groups, they take it up a notch. But hostages were big around then. This is around like the Iran hostage crisis. Taking hostages was big in the 70s, right? It was just the big thing that they did back then. Uh, and Hamas Abdul Khalis thought it would be the most effective method to get his message out. And in order to understand that message, we got to understand the man himself. We got to understand who is Hammas Abdul Khalis. He's a black Muslim, so that's probably not his real name. His real name's probably like his real name's probably like Jeffrey Doolittle or something like that. So what is his real name? Where does he come from? How did he end up in this situation? So Hammas Abdul Khalis was born to Seventh-day Adventist parents in Gary, Indiana in 1921 and was originally named Ernest Timothy McGee. Um, yeah, obviously black Muslims, big fans of changing their names. You know, we have Malcolm X, that's probably the most iconic one, but then you got guys like Kareem Abdul Jabbar. I'm sure Elijah Muhammad wasn't his name to begin with, right? They're big fans of changing their name, and he chose Hammas Abdul Khalis. Pretty decent. I like Khalis. I think I like Khalis better than I like Khalid or Khalif. I think Khalis rolls off the tongue a little bit better, has a sort of mystique about it. So that was a good one. And Ernest Timothy McGee, I do think his parents were setting him up a little bit for failure in that situation. If I'm going to be honest, not to criticize him, I don't think they're the reason that he decided to take a bunch of hostages. But I do think that if my name was Ernest McGee, that sounds like a cartoon character. I'm sorry, it just sounds like someone in Looney Tunes or something like that. It sounds like Elmer Fudd's sidekick. Okay. And this is Ernest McGee. So, and I mean, Hamas Abdul Khalis, maybe it's just like the connotation I have now of, growing up in America during the global war on terror or whatever, but it does instill something in me. I am a little bit scared of that name. I do have a little bit more respect for it than Ernest Timothy McGee. Ernest Timothy McGee sounds like he has like a failing chicken farm or something like that. Abdul or Hamas Abdul Khalis, he sounds like he's lopping off Yazidis' heads in Iraq. Okay, it's just the truth. It strikes a little bit more fear in me. But like I said, might be a little bit of the understanding I have now. You know what I mean? The things that have been ingrained in me as I grew up in this country during the time that I grew up in this country. So Ernest, born in 1921 in Gary, Indiana, and this isn't like modern day Gary, Indiana. This is Gary, Indiana when there was like factories and stuff there, right? When it was like an actual city and not just like a series of abandoned buildings, right? This is before the Rust Belt became the Rust Belt. This was like industrial manufacturing shit. So Ernest graduated 22nd out of 135 students at Roosevelt High School before joining the U.S. Army, where he was dismissed on the grounds of schizophrenia. Damn, that's a tough one. They said, and this is obviously like the 1940s, I do think he served a little bit during World War II, like the very tail end of World War II. I think Ernest McGee was in there, and I don't think they drafted black people back then. I don't think blacks were part of the draft. I think you could only draft white people. So we do got to give him a little bit of credit there. He joined the military during a world war when he didn't necessarily need to. And he joined the army. He didn't join the navy. He wasn't just chilling on a boat or whatever. He joined the army. So we do have to give the guy a little bit of credit there. And like I said, this is the 1940s. So originally they were like, he's feeble-minded. And when I read that, I was like, oh, this is a retarded guy. And I was even more impressed about the fact that he took 3 buildings hostage in Washington, D.C. But apparently, if you weren't completely normal back in the 1940s, they would just call you feeble-minded. And Ernest's specific type of feeble-mindedness was schizophrenia. He it doesn't really go into details. I don't know if he was like a hearing voices type of guy or if he was more of like a conspiracy based type fool, but he did have schizophrenia. That is a fact. It's why he was dismissed from the army. Um, and he really, I think he only served in the army for like a year or two, maybe. It's not really clear. I know a bunch of World War II records got like burned in a big fire or something, so his records could have very well been a part of that. So maybe that's why we don't know how long he served. But he was in there, we know he was in there for a little while, and we'll talk about that later. So after the military, he attended Purdue and the Midwest Music Conservatory before moving to New York to work as a jazz drummer. Um, Once again, a schizophrenic being amazing at art. I mean, how many times has it happened in history, dude? If only Ernest McGee was born today, dude, he could have been yay. I mean, he is our boy, or I'll call him Abdul. I'll respect his name. Our boy Abdul and Kanye West. I mean, not too dissimilar. You know what I mean? Extremely good at music. Like I said, he went to the Midwest Music Conservatory, which I looked it up. I don't think it exists anymore. They were talking about one near Chicago. It said Ernest lived in Chicago for a while, so it might be the same Midwest Music Conservatory, but it's pretty high level. You got to do some work to get up in there. And he was a drummer too. Uh, so, but schizophrenic, great at music, extreme, extreme religious beliefs, especially regarding race and stuff like that. And the Nation of Islam, they also not big fan of the Jays. Not if you've ever heard Louis Farrakhan talk, then you know the Nation of Islam. They're not a big fan of them. All right, and can we blame them? No. So I do think our boy Abdul is pretty similar to Kanye West. I'd say if Kanye West wasn't born today, he'd probably be more like Abdul than Ray Charles, or I guess not Ray Charles, Charlie Parker or whatever. So he moved to New York to be a jazz drummer, and he was a very good jazz drummer, as evidenced by the fact that while in New York, Ernest played drums, and I'm going to call him Ernest because his name was still Ernest at this point in his life. He changes it later to Abdul. So he played drums for Charlie Bird Parker, shout out Kansas City, Bud Powell, Billie Holiday, and many other notable black jazz musicians. These are all, I think I know all these names, and I know nothing about jazz. And so, if I know nothing about jazz and I know these names, that means that these fucking people were like the best of the best. And our boy Ernest at this point was playing drums with them. And I feel like that's a pretty, it's obviously like a huge achievement, right? Because there, this is New York in the 20s, dude, and he was probably living in Harlem or whatever. Almost definitely living in Harlem or near Harlem. There was probably like thousands of other, black dudes from the Midwest who were like, I can play drums. And then fucking our boy Ernest got picked. So he must have been some sort of musical genius. Also went to Purdue in the Midwest Music Conservatory and all that stuff. Um, and so yeah, pretty fucking incredible. And it's like, how does this guy who's like a borderline, uh, like signable jazz musician, right? This dude could get signed by a label or like join a band and get signed by a label. How does this dude end up taking 3 building hostages? Um, an important thing to note is that during this time, during I guess like the 50s, 60s, and stuff like that, the Nation of Islam and just like Islam as a whole was huge among the jazz community in New York for some reason. I think this is around the Harlem Renaissance time. I could be wrong about that, but I do think that was post-war if I remember correctly. So that's that's kind of how he ends up getting involved with Islam and all that stuff. It's the simple fact that there was just this huge cultural revolution going on, and it happened to be going on at the same time that Islam was getting super popular among black people in New York. These two things just happened to kind of coincide with each other. I guess it was kind of black people going their own way, kind of being like, all right, we're kind of done with you guys. Try to do their own thing. Which, hey, you got to give them a little bit of credit for that. After how long would that have been? I mean, over 150 years, like 175 years of of getting dicked on by the white man. They were just like, we're not doing that shit anymore. And so they came up with jazz and the Nation of Islam, which I think I like the Nation of Islam more than I like jazz, if I'm being honest with you guys. So he's doing the drums and all that stuff, and he briefly attended Columbia University before his GI Bill ran out, and he was not able to find steady employment due to his schizophrenia diagnosis. Now, I don't know exactly what they mean by that. I don't know if that means he was applying for jobs and like in the application he was being like, "Hey, I have schizophrenia," or if he was like getting the jobs, but he was just like skitzing out and just being schizophrenic. I do imagine it's the latter because this is the 1940s in New York. You could just walk up to a butcher shop and be like, I know how to kill a hog," and they'd be like, "You're fucking hired." Yeah, they weren't doing like background checks and mental health checks and shit before you got a job anywhere in the 1940s, but especially not in New York. So I do think that's why he wasn't able to find steady employment. It wasn't the fact that he was schizophrenic, it was the fact that he was freaking out and being schizophrenic, and also attended Columbia University on the GI Bill. The GI Bill, I think it was created specifically after World War II. You had to serve a certain amount of time in the army, I think, in order to get the GI Bill, and the GI Bill still exists. Um, and so that's why I think he was in the army for like at least 2 years. I think maybe that's the amount of years. I don't know. Maybe you could just join for a day and get the GI Bill back then. I know now it's like a 4-year contract to get the GI Bill at least. Um, and the GI Bill, it was intended to like send people to college, ensure that people can get houses and stuff like that. That's why it was created after World War II. And a big thing after World War II was black soldiers would often get their GI Bill funds cut. And obviously, they're black people in the 1940s. They don't have much of an avenue to fight back against the system on that one. The system is fighting them already. They're not going to really be able to fight back against the system in order to get their GI Bill money. So that was a big thing that happened to black soldiers after World War II, was that they just got their GI Bill cut and never saw any of the money. So it was also during this time when he joined the Nation of Islam, where he changed his name to Ernest 2X as a rejection of his slave surname. Obviously, everyone knows Malcolm X. His real name, I don't remember what his real name was. It was like Malcolm Gladwell. Is that a famous person? I think Malcolm Gladwell's a famous person, but whatever. That was a thing they did back then. They were like, "I'm rejecting my slave name." And I guess I do like the whole X thing because, like I said before, Islam and in Arab countries and all that stuff, they were a big fan of enslaving the blacks and all that stuff. So you don't want to go straight to like, my name's now Abdul Jabbar Khalif, whatever. You don't want to go straight to that. So you just say, "I'm not having a last name now. All right, black people, we've been getting fucked over forever. The white man enslaved us. The Arabs enslaved us. Our own people enslaved us," which, I mean, that's like every group ever, but still, a lot of slavery was going on for black people over the past 400 years. It's been a tough 400 years for the boys. Maybe a little bit longer than 400 years. Yeah, definitely longer than 400 years. Since like the year 1000 AD, blacks have been getting enslaved. Back then it was the Arabs though. Um, so yeah, I do like the whole X thing as opposed to going straight into like, I'm just choosing a full like Arab Muslim name, just being like, I'm not doing the whole last name thing now. Fuck that shit. I don't know why he chose Ernest 2X. I do think I know a little bit, which we'll talk about it later, about why he chose Ernest 2X instead of just Ernest X. So in 1954, Elijah Muhammad, who was then the head of the Nation of Islam, named Khalis national secretary and sent him to the University of Islam in Chicago. And the University of Islam in Chicago, I googled it. I do think there is like some scholarly sections of it, but I think it's the biggest mosque in the Western Hemisphere still. I could be wrong about that. It was definitely the biggest at the time, and that's saying something because I do think there's some fucking country in South America that randomly just has like a bunch of Muslims in it for some reason. um, but I'm trying to read. No, it's not the biggest anymore. That's all that matters. So it was a huge mosque and I guess a learning center as well. And during this time when Ernest 2X, that being his new name, was the national secretary of the Nation of Islam, he said that he was number two to Elijah Muhammad, right? He said, everyone thinks it was Malcolm X. It was actually me, Ernest 2X, which is why I think he chose the name Ernest 2X, because I think he had a little bit of beef. A little bit of beef with Malcolm X, being like, you think you're the man, dude? You got a white fucking mom. You're not even, you know what I mean? Hitting him with a little bit of the reverse. Being like, you got a white mom, you're not even one of us, dude. What the fuck are you doing here? You got the white man's DNA in you. You got that Yacubian blood in you, brother. I'm number two. Which is why I think he changed his name to Ernest 2X to be like, you're Malcolm X. I'm Ernest 2X, dude. I got two X's in my last name. I double rejected my slave last name, dude. I think that's why our boy Ernest chose 2X as opposed to just a simple X. So we went over to Chicago, and 3 years later, in 1957, Khalees left the Nation of Islam and denounced the cult of personality around Elijah Muhammad. And I'll see if I can pull up his exact quotes real quick, but I don't know if I disagree with him with him that much about what he said about Elijah Muhammad. Um, he I can't remember the exact quote. I'll see if I can find it real quick. So, yeah, so this is what he said. He said Elijah Muhammad was a lying deceiver that lured former dope addicts and prostitute to monk-like lives of sacrifice that would lead them to hell. That's specifically what uh, Ernest 2X said about Elijah Muhammad, which I don't think he was exactly wrong. I do I do think that Ernest was, or not Ernest, Elijah was kind of doing like a whole Jesus thing, being like anyone can find salvation in God, and he was pretty successful with it, right? Like Malcolm X, great leader of the Black Civil Rights, not the best leader of the Black Civil, but a notable leader of the Black Civil Rights movement, and a pretty decent guy, not a great guy, not a horrible guy. He was in jail when he learned about the Nation of Islam, which he might have been the first black guy to convert to Islam at jail, dude. It might have been Malcolm X was the first one. I don't know. I don't know if he was the originator of that, but he obviously, like I said, he went to jail, but he was also a dope addict. I don't know if he did like heroin. I don't even know if they had cocaine back then. I think he was doing heroin, fucking white chicks and all that stuff. And then our boy Elijah Muhammad came in, rescued him. And so I imagine that Malcolm X wasn't the only one. I think Ernest probably he probably saw Elijah Muhammad run that play about 1,000 times. You know what I mean? That was Elijah Muhammad's touch push. That was his LeBron fuck you three. That was Elijah Muhammad's move, and it's a good move. These a lot of addicts really do get better when they find God. So I don't think Elijah Muhammad's a bad guy at all. Nation of Islam's got some crazy ideas. Islam, in and of itself, has some what I would consider some pretty crazy ideas, but I do think Elijah Muhammad was a decent dude, and Khalees was just kind of skitzing out in this situation. And it also doesn't say when he changes his name to Hammas Abdul Khaalis, so I'm just going to call him Khalees from this point on. Um, so after his denouncement, Khalees met a Sunni Muslim mystic from Calcutta who was part of the Barelvi, 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 Barelvi. I don't know how you fucking pronounce it. Whatever. That movement, which was a moderate spiritual revival from South Asia, so around India and Pakistan. That's kind of where this movement was going on, and this dude was apparently Islam can get pretty mystic with it. I don't know. I didn't know Islam was like that. I thought it was just Allah, 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 and just like doing that. And I thought that was like kind of the extent of talking to Allah and Muhammad and all that stuff. No, it gets pretty mystic with it. Like there's this form of it that exists in Senegal, I think, where they full on believe in like almost like an animistic belief where they believe that everything has a spirit to it and stuff. Um, And this dude, obviously, Calcutta's in India. India, they love the spirits and shit over there in India. So not a big surprise to me that this guy came from India. You know, being a mystic. And he was a Sunni Muslim, which there's the two major schools or the two major branches of Islam are Sunni and then Shia. Those are the two big ones. And from my understanding, Sunni's a little bit more of like the I don't know how I was trying to think of it an analogous version of it in Christianity. It's a little bit more it's a I guess progressive is the word, right? Like they obviously Quran is like sacred to them and all that stuff, but I think they believe a little bit more in like the scholars, right? Almost like a Protestant type of thing. I think that's what Sunni Islam is, that obviously they fuck with the Quran and all that stuff, but they also listen to outside opinions. Doesn't mean it's any less extreme. I don't know. I know in Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni Muslim and all that stuff, and he was killing a lot of people. So I don't think that Sunni Islam is necessarily a more peaceful version of it, but I do think it's more progressive, and they expound upon the Quran a little bit more than the Shias do. I do think the Shias are more conservative in the sense that they strictly follow the Quran and like maybe a few of the hadiths. Um, Once again, could be wrong about that, but I do think Sunnis. That's generally what it is. All right, I don't fucking get it exactly. I'm not a scholar, but that's generally the difference between Shia and Sunni. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones, but those are the two major ones, especially in the Middle East. So obviously meets this dude. And so in December 1960, Khalees returned to Chicago to try to convince Elijah Muhammad to take the Shahada oath and convert to Sunni Islam, but was denied. I don't know what type of Islam the Nation of Islam follows. I imagine it's Shia, but then again, they also believe in like Yaqub and all that shit. So it just might be like their own thing. That might just be what the Nation of Islam is. It just might be their own thing completely, right? Almost like Seventh Day Adventists or whatever, right? Or I guess Mormons is probably the best comparison for the Nation of Islam, right? Where they were just like, no, there was actually because I, I, I don't know if it was Elijah Muhammad or if it was the first dude, the actual founder of the Nation of Islam, but one of those guys, or maybe multiple of them, said that they were prophets of Allah. And so I think it's kind of like a Mormon type of thing where Joseph Smith was like, I'm obviously they're called the Latter Day Saints, so like modern day saints. I think that's kind of what it's like. They're not necessarily Shia or Muslim, right? Just how Mormons aren't Christian or aren't Catholic or Protestant, and they're not even really Christian. But that's that's not the point. Um, that they believe in like more modern prophets. I think that's kind of what the main differentiator with the Nation of Islam. And I do think it's pretty extremist because when Malcolm X visited Mecca, he was fully like, dude, we got to stop with this whole Nation of Islam shit, and he left the Nation of Islam. But anyway, we're not talking about him. Dude, Khalees would be so mad about this. He'd be so mad about me talking about Malcolm X when I'm doing the episode about him. He'd be like, dude, I was fucking number 2 over Malcolm X. Fucking I hate Malcolm X. He'd be pissed as hell. But anyway, the boy Khalees, he got denied by Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad said, nope, I'm not becoming Sunni. I'm I'm sticking with the Nation of Islam for a while. And so, in response to Elijah Muhammad's denial of Sunni Islam, Khalees started the Hanafi, which means right way movement, whose legal name was the American Social Federation for Mutual Improvement Incorporated. Which is just, this is like whenever you hear a name like that, right, whether it's like the name of a country or like the name of a movement, right? If you hear a name for a movement and it's like the anti-fascist fighters for equality and democracy and peace in the United States, they're not necessarily like an evil group of people, but a very corrupt group of people, I'll say. And that's what I'd say about the Hanafi movement as well. I don't think they were evil, but definitely not what they said they were. They definitely weren't the American Social Federation for Mutual Improvement Incorporated. They definitely weren't that. And Hanafi was that was one of the things that the Sunni Muslim mystic taught him, the dude from India. He taught him about Hanafi and kind of all these other stuff. And I think Hanafi, it implies that you are directly following Muhammad. That's kind of what Hanafi implies. I don't think it means it directly, but it means, hey, I'm going the right way. I'm following Muhammad. I'm not listening to your your Nation of Islam teachings about whatever the fuck. I'm following Muhammad. That's kind of what Khalees was implying when he named the movement that and founded it in the first place. He was implying that the Nation of Islam is not following Muhammad and that he actually was following Muhammad. And God, I don't want to spoil it, but it does not turn out well for Khalees. It turns out very, very poorly. So in 1968, militant black students from Howard University joined Khalees's American Musselman's Rifle and Pistol Club, which was a charter of the NRA after their own group was forced to disband. So they had their own club at Howard. It was called like the Kiowa family or something like that. It was a black Muslim group at Howard University, which, if you don't know, that's one of the HBCUs in America. And they joined up with Khalees in the Hanafi movement. And I didn't know this. Musulman, that's an old term for like a Muslim dude, right? I think Benjamin Franklin, he talked about Muslims a little bit and he called them Muhammad men. Uh, and I guess Musulman is just like another term for that. And it's pretty sick that the NRA in like the 1960s, like the late 1960s, were like, you're a Muslim black militant group? Fuck yeah, dude, join up with us. Hell yeah, you could join it. You could join up with us, dude. What are you guys? The American Musselman's Rifle and Pistol Club? And you're a bunch of angry college students? Fuck yeah, join the NRA. And the NRA is the National Rifle Association. I don't know. I think that's pretty funny and sick that they were like the rest of the country was like fighting and stuff about that, right? The rest of like the conservative groups were like trying to keep people or black people out of stuff, and the NRA was like, "Hell yeah, dude! You guys love guns? We love guns too, dude. Let's fucking join forces together." I don't know. I thought that was pretty fucking funny. So a few years later, Khalees converted basketball player Lou Alcindor to Islam, and in return he received a mansion in Washington, D.C., which was converted into the Hanafi movement's headquarters. And Lou Alcindor, you're probably thinking to yourself, where have I heard that name before? Lou Alcindor. It sounds so familiar. Who is Lou Alcindor? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It was fucking Ernest 2X, aka Hammas Abdul Khaalis, aka Ernest Timothy McGee. This fucking guy, he was the one who turned Kareem Abdul-Jabbar into a Muslim, which that's crazy. I always kind of assumed it was Malcolm X or someone else from the Nation of Islam. No, it was the dude who was against the Nation of Islam because, uh, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he was like fully. I'm not talking to white reporters and stuff like that for a little bit. I think he kind of calmed down on that shit, but he was kind of fully in that shit of being like, fuck no, I ain't talking to you fucking honkies or whatever. So I always kind of assumed that he was a Nation of Islam guy. Turns out it was fucking Hammas Abdul Khaalis, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think that Khalees is any less extreme than the Nation of Islam. He might be a little bit less because he was, involved in the whole Sunni mystic thing. So he might be a little bit less extreme than the Nation of Islam, probably less racist. I do think he was significantly less racist than they were. Um, so yeah, that was a big get by him though. that was a great when I read that I was like, you got to start with that. That has to be the intro into this guy's life story. It was like, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? Do you know why he's named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? Do you know why what he's is he a six-time MVP or is he just a six-time champ? Whatever. He was the all-time leading scorer for like 90 fucking years in the NBA. Had one of the most unstoppable moves ever. You know how that guy came up with the name Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? It was this guy. It was goddamn Hammas Abdul Khaalis who helped him come up with that shit from Lou Alcindor. That's a big get. And he also got the fucking mansion out of it. Or obviously, Hammas Abdul Khaalis got the mansion out of it, not fucking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And you got this mansion in Washington D.C. And it's a pretty big mansion, but it's in the city, so it's not like a huge sprawling estate or whatever. But it's a pretty big mansion in Washington D.C. in like the city proper, which another big get by him, dude. That was a 2-for-1. He was like all-time leading scorer, also a mansion in Washington D.C. Big get by our boy. So, in 1973, tensions flared again between the Nation of Islam as Khalis wrote an open letter to Elijah Muhammad where he claimed that Muhammad was a lying deceiver who would lead his followers to hell. So I said that earlier. But that's when he said it. He was like, fucking, I don't know why he decided to do this, because I think in 1971 is when he converted Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Islam, and I don't know, maybe he like didn't really do anything between then and when he wrote the letters, but I'd be like, fuck it, I'm done with you guys. I've moved past you guys. Who the fuck do you guys have on your side? You guys got Malcolm X. Okay, well, he's fucking dead at this point, I'm pretty sure. So you guys are falling off hard. But for some reason he just couldn't let it go. He still had the beef with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. Yeah, at this point, dude, Malcolm X has been dead for 7 years. I don't know why he's going back at the fucking Nation of Islam, but he decided to do it, and he talks shit specifically about Elijah Muhammad, who Elijah Muhammad he's the one who really grew the movement. Wallace Fard Muhammad, he was the dude who founded it, but the Nation of Islam as we know it today, he was the one who got Malcolm X. He was the one that kind of made it a little bit less extreme with the whole Yaqub and all that shit. He was the one that really made the Nation of Islam what it was. So he was going after him. That's going after the big guy. You know what I mean? That's like writing a letter against the Patriots and going after Tom Brady. Like, this was a very big deal for the people of the Nation of Islam, for Khalis to say that their spiritual leader, the dude who kind of reformed the movement and made it big and popular and all that stuff, to say that he's going to take them all to hell. It's a big deal for these guys. So on January 18th, 1973, two men entered 7700 16th Street in Washington, D.C., and massacred the family of Hammas Abdul Khaalis. Like I said, dude. The beef is crazy. They came in, and that's his address, by the way. If you want to, the building doesn't have like a special specific name or anything. It's just 7700 16th Street, and this is it's a big book. The book is called, I think it's The Breeding of Contempt by, who's it by? I think it's by a guy named John W. King. So there's a whole big book about this. Yeah, The Breeding of Contempt, Account of the Largest Mass Murder in Washington, D.C., originally published in 2002. So this was a very, very big deal, even outside of, the black Islamic movement in America. This was just a huge deal in general. I mean, yeah, and that makes sense. A family was massacred in the middle of our nation's capital. It's a pretty big deal, even if you are racist. Even if you're racist and you're like, black people are fucking animals, you're still like, they killed 7? They killed 7, dude? Or I think it was 7 people. I think it was maybe even more than 7 people. Like I said, this was also the headquarters. And also family. I don't know if that directly means people he was related to, because just with like a lot of these religious movements, especially the ones that are a little bit smaller, they'll be like, we're just like a big family or whatever. But there was some people that he was actually related to, like blood related to, right? His blood family who were killed in this massacre. So the men were members of the Philadelphia Black Muslim Mafia and were there to enact revenge for letters written about the Nation of Islam who would mock Khalees in their newspaper. So Khalees, he obviously wrote that letter, the open letter to Elijah Muhammad, which means he was talking to Elijah Muhammad, but he published it like publicly. That's basically what an open letter is, at least from my understanding of it. And I think he wrote a few other letters as well. And then after his family gets massacred, the Nation of Islam mocks them in their newspaper. God, you can. This is where I kind of started to understand where he was coming from. It was like, yeah, dude, all you did was take over a few buildings, and Khalees, he really didn't even do anything that bad himself. Yeah, he held a few people hostage for a little bit. That sucks, but he didn't go as far as like I would have. Like if a bunch of dudes came into my house and like killed or tried to kill my entire family, I would have probably gone crazier than Hammas Abdul Khaalis did. I would have gone out of my mind. And he didn't even get back at the Nation of Islam really. Not didn't do anything super. And to be fair, at this point, he's probably scared out of his goddamn mind. His entire fucking family basically just got killed in front of his face. I can understand why he wouldn't want to directly attack the Nation of Islam. I understood why he was a little bit like, all right, you guys win. uh, and so, in the end, Khalees's daughter and wife would survive with severe brain damage, and despite this, Khalees would still care for both of them. God damn, dude. He's got some crazy ideas. He's obviously, we know how this ends up, but he's a pretty decent guy. His daughter had severe brain damage. I think she had some sort of permanent brain damage, but it wasn't super, super bad. But his wife was fully in a vegetative state, and all she could do was be like, like literally. It's funny, but it's also, that's all she could do. That's like the truth of the situation. She would just like moan all day like that. And Khalees stayed there and took care of him, dude. Solid guy. Any guy that does that, I think is a pretty solid guy. Did he lose his mind a little bit and take over a few buildings in Washington, D.C.? Sure. But, I mean, he stayed there for his wife who was in a vegetative state when he could have just been like, I mean, I guess this is the 70s at this point. This isn't like the 30s where he could just be like, she's out of her mind, put her in the sanitarium and walk away. But still, this is the 70s. He could have just left her and remarried or whatever, but he didn't. He stayed with her. He took care of her and his daughter. Solid guy. Solid guy, in my opinion. Lost his mind a little bit there. But I do think he didn't lose it that much. Like I said, most people would have done worse. Most people would have immediately pulled up to the Nation of Islam headquarters with a gun and been like, well, you killed them and then you mocked them. I kind of got to kill you now. But Khalees didn't. He stayed relatively peaceful, and he stayed peaceful basically the entire time. There's not like a real like grotesque violent event anywhere in his life, like at all. I don't know, maybe there was and we just don't know about it, but seemingly he stayed peaceful the entire time. So big shout out to him. Um, all right, and now it's here, dude. We got the setup. Khalees' family just died. He's angry, just angry at the world in general. He's probably blaming like the Jews and the white man still. And he decides to take some hostages. On March 9th, 1977, 7 members of the Hanafi movement burst into the headquarters of B'nai B'rith and took over 100 hostages. Pretty decent haul on that one. You know what I mean? Throw out the casting net, got a bunch of bait fish. That's kind of what this is. 100 hostages at the headquarters of B'nai B'rith, and I'll talk about what that is. And they did it, by the way, 0 kills. They were able to take over the building and not kill a single person. I don't think they even shot anyone. I do think they were armed. Like I said, we talked a little bit earlier about the American Musselman's Pistol and Rifle Club or whatever it was called. So they probably were armed, but they did it without shooting anyone. They just walked in, real nice and casual, like the dudes in the town or whatever. And when they're just like, we're not gonna hurt you, just give us the goddamn money. That's kind of what they did here. Just walked in with the guns, like, all right, everybody, calm down. You're not gonna see your family tonight, but we're also you'll see your family at some point. If you just chill out, you'll see your family at some point. Not tonight, like I said. I kind of got some business that I got to deal with, but we're taking over B'nai Birth. And B'nai Birth is a Jewish heritage association aimed at the security of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. So, yeah, I mean, if you're not a big fan of the Jews, I'd say that's a pretty good target to go after. He's not going after like some, synagogue, where people are just going to church or whatever. He's not going to like some community center. He's going after a place that has ties to a pretty powerful country. So I'd say this is a pretty, in terms of like morality and in terms of how effective the hostage situation is going to be, I'd say this is a pretty good choice. And he also didn't even kill anybody when he took it over. And he really, like I said, he was a member of the Nation of Islam for a while. I don't know how he felt about Jews during the Hanafi movement, but Nation of Islam, not big fans of the Jays at all. So, and like I said, pretty decent building to take over. If I had to choose a building to take over, I'd say that would probably have been in my top 10. All right, my internet's kind of cutting out here, so I'm going to stop the recording to make sure it's saved. All right, the recording got all messed up, but whatever. We're back. So, the 7 members of the Hanafi movement take over the B'nai Birth building in Washington, D.C., and then less than an hour later, 3 men entered the Islamic Center of Washington and took 11 hostages. I do think that the Islamic Center of Washington does have ties to the Nation of Islam, but I don't think it's like owned by the Nation of or the Nation of Islam. And so they took that over. Only got 11 on this one. Decent, not as good as the first one. I think the first one, if I remember correctly, that was their best. That was their best haul. Yeah, the Islamic Center of Washington, it's just a mosque. And so 7 or wait, sorry. 11 isn't bad. It's a decent amount, not great, not horrible. The first one, I feel like at this point they are a little bit disappointed. They're like, dude, we got 100 on the first one. We got 100 Jews on the first one. This is like tippy top of the tippy top in terms of the hostages you want to take. You know what I mean? 100 Jewish hostages, or over 100 Jewish hostages, you're getting whatever you want, I feel like. Or maybe not whatever you want, but you're definitely, you have more chips on the table. You get a decent amount going on. So, and then at 2:20 p.m., 2 men entered the district building near the White House and went to the 5th floor to find high-value hostages. And essentially what the district building is, it's basically like the town hall of Washington, D.C. It's like, that's where the city council chambers are. I think that's where the mayor's office is, if I remember correctly. Maybe not, but it's like, it's a big administrative building for the city of Washington, D.C. It's not tied to like the federal government or whatever. It's just purely a Washington, D.C. type setup. Like I said, city council, mayor, sanitate, like all that bullshit. That's what the district building is. So 2 men entered there. I think they took the elevator to the 5th floor, and it wasn't really clear if it was the 4th or the 5th floor, but the result's pretty much the same. So they went to one of the higher floors looking for high-valued hostage, and so while trying to take control of the building, the gunman shot and killed radio reporter Maurice Williams and mortally wounded police officer Mac Contrell, and shot future D.C. Mayor Marion Barry, and 2 others were injured. The radio host, Maurice Williams, he was a black guy. Marion Barry, he's a black guy. Mac Contrell, couldn't find any pictures of him. Maybe a black guy, maybe not a black guy, but they for hating and like I said, I don't know if the Hanafis hated white people, but I know the Nation of Islam did. They got all blacks on that one. That was straight up spades and clubs, if you know what I mean. It was all blacks. It was all. That's all they got on that one. And actually, Marion Barry, the dude who would become the mayor of Washington D.C., he got shot. I guess they had shotguns because he got shot and a shotgun pellet like almost got lodged in his heart, right? Like a centimeter or whatever above his heart. A shotgun pellet got lodged in there from like I'm assuming birdshot because if it was buckshot, he would have been 100% dead. Um, and so this one's probably the least successful. I don't even remember how many hostages they got from the district building, but obviously they got 100 on the first one, 11 on the next one, and also the Islamic Center of Washington is on Embassy Row, which is obviously what it sounds like. It's where all the embassies are and stuff. And so that's also another very high value target. They went after some pretty high value targets on this one. I think, I mean, the Benai Birth one was probably like the least high value in terms of just like international power, but also it has ties to Israel, so it might be by far the most powerful. But they got some pretty decent polls on this one. District building, Islamic Center of Washington. I'd say Islamic Center of Washington. It might be last just because there, especially during this time, not a whole lot of Muslim influence over the U.S. government. But it's on Embassy Row, so I'm not gonna try and bother ranking them. That could be a fun, could be a fun future ranking episode. Ranking buildings took over during hostage situations. Um, but pretty decent haul from these guys. So once he had the hostages, Khalees demanded that the killers of Malcolm X and his family be handed over, as well as a refund of $750 in legal fees he acquired after yelling at his family's killers in court. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to include a lot about his life, not to just get a better understanding of the guy in the movement, but also like why did he do this? And I think I know there's no way that the slaughtering of his family wasn't a major motivator or piece of the puzzle in terms of his motivation for going out and taking these hostages. And I'm assuming that one's symbolic. I'm assuming the $750 is a symbolic thing, being like, you guys did me wrong when it came to my family getting killed. You guys disrespected me, gave me I yelled at a dude in court who killed my entire family. You're lucky I didn't jump over the thing and like break his neck, right? Like that video of the dude jumping at the judge. That's what Hamas should have done, but he didn't do that. All he did was yell at the guy. And so he was probably pretty fucking pissed off that he was able to remain that calm. And I would call that remaining calm in that situation. I don't know, maybe an emotional pussy, but to me that's remaining calm in that situation. Um and all he did was yell at the guy, and they charged him $750, which, let's see what that is in inflation money. Like how much is that today? Because I'm assuming it's a symbolic thing, but it might be it might have just been a fuck ton of money back then. Um yeah. All right, January 2000, we're going back to 1972. How much was he going to get back in terms of, modern day inflation? That's $6,000. Okay, it might not be as symbolic as I think it is, but still, I think it's pretty symbolic. And also $750 had like a way bigger buying power back then. You could buy like a car with $750 back in the day. So, and the group, so he obviously has the refund thing and he wants the killers of Malcolm X and his family, but the group also demanded that the movie Muhammad, Messenger of God, be banned as they believed it depicted Muhammad, or it depicted the prophet's image and voice, which was not the case. So this was a movie that was coming around back then. It was called Muhammad, Messenger of God. Eventually, they changed the name to just The Messenger. But a big thing in Islam, if you don't know, is no pictures of the boy. No pictures of Muhammad, of him riding his flying donkey or whatever. You're not allowed to depict Muhammad in any way, I guess including his voice. which that's crazy. I don't know. I guess being Christian, you're like depicting someone as like the highest honor or whatever. But I think maybe the Muslims just like weren't good at art. And so like everyone who drew a picture of Muhammad was like a super shitty picture of Muhammad. And so they were like, fucking no more pictures of Muhammad, dude. You guys keep fucking it up. Maybe that's why they did it. But the group thought that they were gonna, which also it's like, I don't know. It's like you live in America, dude. Not everyone has to follow your fucking religion, but whatever. That's probably the demand of these that I'm like kind of the most. Like, what do you do? Like the other ones, I can understand why he did this in the first place. And the whole Muhammad Messenger of God thing might have not even been his idea. I don't fucking know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But the other ones I can kind of understand. And then it's this one, and it's just like, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird to me to include this one. To take over a fucking building so that, so that a fucking movie that might or might not have a picture of a dude. And it's like, Muhammad isn't like to Catholics, Mary is like the perfect woman, right? She's the mother of God and all that stuff. Jesus is God incarnate. He's the son of God, right? And then you have all like the prophets and all that shit. Muhammad wasn't even one of those, like even in like the uh, the zeitgeist of Islam, they fully acknowledge that Muhammad like sinned and all that stuff. So I don't know. It's just weird to me that that's like one of the rules they have. It's like he's not that sacred, right? He's probably like number two. Probably number one's Allah, and number two's Muhammad, right? That's probably how the ranking goes if I fucking had to guess. And but he's a far number two. Like in terms of like Christianity, you got God and then Jesus, which are kind of one in the same. Fucking, I don't know how that shit works. But you got God and then you got Jesus, and I feel like that's a pretty close number one and two. But in Islam, I feel like Allah is number one far and away, and then we go down a ways, and then we got Muhammad number two. I think maybe I'm wrong about that shit. But anyway, that was one of their other demands. I just thought that was a funny one. One, because it's ridiculous, and two, because they were wrong about what they about what they thought was going to happen in this movie. So, first coordinator for counterterrorism, L. Douglas Heck, and Associate Deputy Attorney General, fucking little cameo here. Once again, Lou Alcindor cameo, Malcolm X kind of a cameo, Rudy Giuliani, our third or maybe fourth cameo. Uh, he originally claimed DC police would handle the situation, but soon brought in intelligence operatives Steve Pijanic and Robert Blam. I think both of these guys worked in the State Department, if I remember correctly, and so they were brought in, CIA type of guys, to handle this. And one of them, I think maybe Steve. One of these two guys has been on Infowars before, like not featured on Infowars, like actually been on Infowars, which is pretty fucking is pretty fucking insane to me, in my personal opinion. Yeah, it was Steve Pijanic, who is a Cuban Jewish spy. Or not spy, but like involved in intelligence and all that stuff. And he's still alive. Yeah, so he's a Cuban American psychiatrist, author, publisher, and conspiracy theorist. In 1976, he was made Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under Harry Kissinger. Yeah, and so he worked for the State Department and all that stuff. And so Pijnik, I'm assuming that's how you say his name, has made several appearances on InfoWars. He also claimed that the September 11th attacks and Sandy Hook shooting were false flag operations. Hilarious cameo. This guy, he's not a super well-known guy, but I do think this is a pretty funny cameo. Is that like in the middle of this like kind of not super well-known hostage takeover in Washington D.C. in the late 70s, there was a guy who was one of like the main negotiators slash counter-terrorist guys on the scene, would go on to be on InfoWars, and not even go on InfoWars to talk about that situation. He was going on there to talk about 9/11 and Sandy Hook and stuff. I don't know. I think that's fucking hilarious. So anyway, those were the two negotiators, Steve Pijnik and Robert Blam. So when negotiators expressed concerns over the fate of the hostages, Khaalis said, and I handwrote this all out. So And also, I took a couple parts out of the quote that aren't really important to it at all. They just don't add anything more, so I kind of took them out. So anyway, nobody showed any concern when my family was killed several years earlier, he told a reporter. Quote, get on the phone and call President Carter. Some of these senators that never sent a call, a condolence, or a condolence message. Do you not realize when my family was wiped out, no one said a word? Not one. So I'm very glad you're worried now. When they wiped out my family, I didn't. Sorry, my handwriting is so shit. I didn't hear about your sympathy and emotions. I got a letter the other day from my brother telling me about who the brother was swaggering around in jail, the killer of Malcolm. Well, tell him it's over. Tell him it's payday. Jason Statham. Hey, you're depicting Muhammad in the movie. I'm gonna take over a building in Washington D.C. Okay, I can't do a fucking Jason Statham. Whatever. I don't know. The end of that kind of felt like a Jason Statham movie quote to me. Tell him it's over. Tell him it's payday. He's not having any of that. Basically, he was like, "Oh, you feel bad for these people, but you don't feel bad for the fucking people that killed my family." And he was mad at the judge, the the judge who presided over his case. He called him like a Jew or whatever. He was like, this fucking sneaky Jew fucking over my family. So he was very pissed about that. And then the other thing, so I don't think he cared about the Muhammad messenger of God thing. I think that was just like other people that were in the group. I think he was mostly focused on getting the killer of his family in Malcolm X, and also getting his money back. Yeah. It's a pretty badass quote, though. Tell him it's over, tell him it's payday. And this is before any like movies like that came out. So he came up with that one off the top of his own, though. So on the evening of March 10th, ambassadors of Pakistan, Iran, and Egypt, as well as several DC officials, including the police commander who investigated the massacre of Khalees's family, met with the Hanafis. And this guy, so this is why I don't think that Khalees was super racist, was because the guy who investigated his family's murder was named John O'Brien or something like that. It was like a super like a white Irish name, like a white Irish cop name. And so I assume he was a white guy. I don't know, but he was like Khalees trusted him, like implicitly trusted this guy, like no matter what, trusted this dude. I guess he did a really good job in investigating the murder of his family or whatever, which that's kind of what led me to say I don't know if they're as racist as the Nation of Islam. They might have been, though, and this might have just been like the exception to the rule. He might have just been one of the good ones. You're one of the good ones. All right. And so this is a pretty decent group of people. We got ambassadors from Pakistan, Iran, and Egypt. Obviously, they chose those guys on purpose. You know, those are the Muslim guys that are going to be able to kind of relate a little bit more to Khalees. So before negotiations, Khalees prayed and had a vision of the Sunni mystic who inspired Hanafi, and he received guidance before proceeding to the negotiations. So he had the Muslim prayer where they look at their hands and then they look at the sky or whatever. That's how like Muslims pray when they're not doing the Allah, Allah, when they put their head on the ground. The other way they pray is they look at their hands and they look up at the sky, I think. I don't know. That's from the TV show Roots, the one that came out in 2016, so that might be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And so Khalees received a refund for his contempt of court fine, and the premiere of the movie Muhammad Messenger of God was delayed, and then obviously they changed the name to just The Messenger. And the criminals, but the criminals were not handed over to Khalees, although a review of their cases was promised. And that's kind of like a bitchy, like, oh yeah, we'll review the case, Khalees. We'll review it. That I feel like it's a little bit condescending to say that. It's like, dude, you know why unless you're going to give him the death sentence, then you know I'm not going to be happy, right? You know the only reason I want you to hand them over to me is so I can fucking kill him myself. He's probably feeling a little bit done wrong in that situation, which is understandable. Did get his refund though, and the movie was delayed, although I'm pretty sure he didn't give a shit about the movie. All right. So Khalees ordered an immediate surrender, and 12 Hanafis were charged and then freed. and the 3 at the district building heist hesitated, then they surrendered. Um, I think they were immediately arrested. The other 12, the ones who were at the B'nai Birth building and the Islamic Center in Washington building, they came out, hands up in the air. I think they probably just got like charged there, and then they were allowed to walk free just because they didn't harm anyone. And I think this was like a 2-day situation, so it wasn't. They were pretty reasonable, didn't hurt anyone. Were pretty reasonable about it. So I think the cops just like charged him there and then kind of told him to fuck off. But then obviously the dudes, at first the dudes in the district building were like, we might have to shoot our way out of this. But then they were like, nope. And they just came out and were arrested and all that stuff. So the 12 nonviolent Hanafis, I don't know if nonviolent's the right word. They entered a building with guns and took hostages, but they didn't kill anyone. All right, I'll just say that. They didn't kill anyone. So the 12 nonviolent Hanafis were all tried and convicted, and Khalees received a sentence of 21 to 120 years for his role and died in prison. Damn, dude. He got his money back, but his family's killers, I guess, didn't get sentenced to death. It sucks, dude. And they should have. I feel like that's an objective thing that I can say. Look, I learned about the guy's life story, learned about all the bullshit that he went through. The whole GI Bill situation, his family getting killed, the split with the Nation of Islam, all that stuff. So maybe I do have a little bit more sympathy for him, but I feel like if you enter a building and massacre an entire family of people, you just don't get to live anymore. I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry. No more life for you. I don't think that's super unreasonable to say that. But pretty decent episode, I think. What is this, an hour and 15 minutes? Whatever it is, I feel like I did a decent job. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Next week might just be one episode. Oh, fuck. Comment and let me know if you think this is good or bad. If anyone's still listening at this point. I assume no one is, but if you are, let me know if this one was any better than usual or just even different at all. And if you liked it or not. But yeah, next week might just be a regular episode because I have finals and stuff like that. And it's starting to snow outside, so I might not be able to drive. So it might just be one episode. I'll try to get 2 out though. But I hope you guys have a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life. If you got finals coming up, I hope they go well for you. But that's all I've got, guys. Peace.